met. Thank you so much for doing this. As you and I talked about earlier today, that you and I have worked together for a long time. It's been like 22 years off and on that you and I have been able to work together.
It's mostly on. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's an entire career
yeah, it is. It feels
almost.
like a lot of chapters of life that we've shared and been
That's
through
right.
together. Yeah. And one of the things I know that as a coach that we learn a lot from our clients in general. And I have learned a lot from you and your experiences over the years. So, first, thank you for sharing those moments and your own inner thoughts along the way in these many years, couple of decades. And as I said to you earlier, I definitely feel like I'm a better human because of the work we've done together.
Well, it's mutual. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And one of the many things that I've learned from you and used over and over again with clients. So I thought it would be a really good idea if we could talk about this particular phrase that you used with me, because you know it from a real life perspective. So you used the term with me, rest steps. And I know it came from it predates your management career, that experience. So I'm wondering if you could just tell us a bit, just sort of technically, what are rest steps, and then we can talk about implication for leadership and living.
Really, it's a metaphor, but rest steps are a fundamental technique for climbing and mountaineering, and it reduces your energy output while speeding your progress. And here's how it works. If you imagine climbing up a steep slope, you take a step uphill and plant your bent leg, on the uphill section. Your back leg is straight and you're resting on the bone. And you just take a pause to rest, and then you move that leg uphill and keep your downhill again pause. So it's really one of those skills that is seemingly simple, but it is highly effective and actually very difficult to master. But in climbing, if you ignore the rest step, you actually feel much more hurried. You expend a lot more energy, and you're actually going slower.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's not uh,
It's a paradox.
logical. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
paradox. It's a
it's a
paradox. So what
paradox.
makes it hard? You mentioned that it's actually hard to do. What makes it hard?
I think that it's a conscious effort. At least for me, when I'm climbing and I'm not practiced at it, I just want to start going fast. Then you kind of stop and you breathe. And I think we've all experienced this going uphill. And then you get going again, and then you stop and you breathe, as opposed to having kind of this steady progression with very small rests with every single step. So it's really pacing yourself. And pacing yourself is much more effective and much faster than kind of going out hurried and then running out of breath. And, of course, I use this as a metaphor to pace myself in a lot of things, as well as being an executive.
Great. Thank you. I know as you talk about this franticness and then sort of the collapse where you got to try to recover, that's me. That's my life in general. With an ADHD brain, it's kind of like that. So, how have you applied that to your leadership? I know I've used it as a metaphor with a lot of my clients. How do you actually apply it in like daily living and leading?
I think that the job of an executive, the fundamental job, is to move an organization through change. That's what you're hired for. And there's no end of the work and no end of the amount of change that is necessary in pretty much any organization. And I find myself, with this metaphor, particularly when I get or whenever I've stepped into a new job, I just want to start running and I want to start moving as quickly as possible. And you find yourself exhausted, and that exhaustion actually can impact your health, but it also impacts the speed in which you're able to move an organization. through that change. And so, being able to be conscious around how I pace things actually allows me to move more quickly, is what I have found. Move the organization more quickly. And again, as we said a minute ago, it's a paradox. But if you build in a rest, admits the challenges that you're facing, the chaos, and sometimes the exhaustion that you feel. If you build in those rests and you build yourself a little bit of a sustainable pacing, you actually get to your goal much quicker, much more quickly. And but just like mountaineering, it's a skill. And it's a skill you have to work on and be very conscious about. If you put me on a mountain right now, I'd have to really think about it and take me a while to get into that rhythm of the rest step.
I know you and your wife just came back from a really long gravel ride from Canada to Mexico. And is that something you incorporated into that event as well? And are there some like sort of leadership metaphor embedded in some of your experience in that one?
It's I hadn't thought about it with respect to gravel riding and this trip that we took, but I would credit Lisa for this, not me. So Lisa kind of put bounds around how many miles we would do a day, and there's she's a very experienced cyclist. She rides 5,000 miles or more a year. And so, on our trip, she was kind of saying we need to average about 50 miles a day. And clearly, in any one day, we can do a lot more than that. And in fact, some days we had to do more than that. But I thought 50 miles isn't that much. And she would remind me, it's not the individual day, it's the cumulative effect. And so you have to think about tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And that is true in everything in life. And it's certainly true in being an executive. Anybody can run out and get a ton of work done in a week or a month, but can you sustain that? And can you sustain it in a way that is uh, good for your health and good for the organization?
Great, thanks. You also mentioned something that Lisa promoted on your trip, every 10 miles. Could you share that one as well? Because that sounds to me a bit like a version of a rest step as well. A
Yeah.
rest step plus.
Yes. So it was Lisa made the rule on our bike trip that we had to pause and celebrate every 10 miles. And some of those 10 miles were more difficult to earn than others, but every 10 miles we stopped and celebrated, and we did that 255 times. And, on the really difficult days, it was kind of fun to look forward to having a little celebration. And on the fast days, you're always kind of amazed at how quickly they came. But yeah, having that little 10-mile celebration for a
Right. And
2,500-mile ride.
that's amazing. That's amazing. And your celebration was basically a little happy dance. Is that sort of what it was?
Exactly. It was, I sang mostly just to irritate Lisa because I'm a terrible singer. And she goes, "No, please." But it was funny.
It was a celebration for you anyway.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. And then just as we kind of close this up, thanks, Matt, for taking the time and sharing this. Can you think of a specific instance that you remember, either just in a time of, I'll call it normal in quotes, sort of normal chaos of leadership? We also know there are crisis times. You and I talked a number of times over the years about like peacetime and wartime CEO and that concept and putting that into place. So in times of crisis, does the rest step look any different than it does in the normal chaos of trying to run a business?
I think the rest step looks different in every situation. And so if you go back to climbing, think about, the variables of technical difficulty, the variables of altitude, and the variables of the incline of the slope. So if it's not technical, it's, low altitude and not very steep, your rest isn't very long. It's a microsecond. At 23,000 feet without any oxygen, and it's very technical, your rest might be 3, 4 breaths before you move your leg again. You're moving very, very slowly. So, the rest step is pertinent in any situation. It's how you pace yourself and how much time you take for that rest does change given the circumstances.
Mm, great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it makes total sense. And I just love this analogy. I've loved it for years. I love it even more now as I'm listening to you kind of describe it and think about some of the nuance and the connection to climbing is really graphic and much more embodied than just a concept, even though I've never been a mountain climber. I guess one more thing that I might ask is there a specific example of some of your leadership where you can talk about, maintaining whatever confidentiality is necessary, talk about a situation where you were intentional about incorporating rest steps? What that looked like and what you did?
You know, um, uh, I can think of many examples, but one of them is when I stepped in as a CEO of a company. And, you know, anybody who's had that experience, you kind of step back, you do an assessment, you see all of the challenges that you're going to have and all of the changes that the organization needs to go through. And when you're brand new, you don't know which are the priorities. I mean, the obvious priorities are there, but you don't know exactly how you're going to prioritize things. So, and what I noticed in this particular organization is kind of this frenzied movement to kind of keep working on the business. And in this particular case, my mantra to the organization in the beginning was we need to slow down in order to speed up. And so it was really about slowing down and slowing that pace down to work on not the urgent but the important. And that ended up connecting with the organization. I didn't use the analogy of the rest step in this particular case, but it was the exact same thing. And so, I think of it from the standpoint of I used to guide climbing, and I would see new people go out, climbing Mount Baker or something, and they would just get frenzied and they'd start running up, and I go, oh, slow down. You're not going to make it. And so it was exactly the same with this particular organization. We just had to just slow down to be able to really focus on the important work that we needed to do.
Thanks. What are some, I was thinking about that situation too, because I remember us having some conversations about that when you stepped into that role. What were some of the specific things you did that helped slow the organization down?
Well, I think that, you know, this is a little bit off topic of the rest step, but I'll answer the question
Yeah,
is,
right, thanks.
I always believe that vision is the what an organization is going to become. Strategy is the how you're going to get there. And it's amazing how many organizations focus on strategy and they wander around with the strategy without really understanding the vision. If you create a clear vision of where you're going, people know how to get there. Strategy, in my opinion, is overrated, completely overrated. It really is. Vision is the hard thing. It is a very, very difficult to clearly articulate a vision to an organization. And once you do that, people understand what's important and they understand they want to achieve that vision. So in this particular case, that's what I did is I worked on clarifying the vision for the organization so that slowed down a little bit on the strategy of all this work that was happening and clarified the vision, which changed the strategy of how we were going to get there.
Wow, fabulous. I am thinking that's another conversation we need to have another time, if you're willing to do that, because I think there's so much written about it, so many people talk about vision that I think it's gotten muddied. It's not very clear. And I think it does apply to a rest step because you do have to step back. And it's a different kind of mindset to be able to focus on the dream, sort of what is the bigger reason that we're here And I think it does apply as a rest step because it does require us to stop and to pause and take some breath. So, Matt, thank
I
you so
find
much.
vision
Oh, sorry.
extraordinarily hard, but thank you.
Good. Well, it should be a juicy conversation then.
Yeah, all
If you're willing
right.
to do it, you can always say no, of course. Thank you. For now, let's call that good on rest steps. Unless there's a
All right.
parting word or phrase or something you'd like to say to kind of close up this conversation.
Nope, I think we covered it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it
Thank
very
you.
much, Matt.